But really excited about seeing what we can learn from each other and being a bigger part of this group. So you're going to start seeing my face around at these quite a bit, along with Todd Sanson and the person who puts them all together, Caitlin.
All right, guys. So for the ones who have been in here a few times, it's nice to see some new faces, which is making me very happy. We're all about building the community over here on this side of town as well. So definitely glad for the newcomers. So what we usually do, I do have 2 books, and we do have some swag bags. That's not going to change. We have plenty of them. So, hey, you. So we have plenty of them. Do the whole Twitter thing. I know I got ridiculed the last time I said that. So do hashtag University iOS, and the ones with the best tweets will get the books and the swag bags. I know it's pretty entertaining. The Wi-Fi password is also on the backs of the chairs. It's modern iOS, all lowercase, and it's Cloud Space Network. So you guys are able to use the Wi-Fi. Other than that, I would like to announce our first speaker. I knew I was going to do it. I wanted to say something else. So here, let's put this on you. I knew it was going to happen. I warned you.
Should just wing it.
I know.
Everyone always does.
All right, here, put that in your pocket.
In my pocket. All right. Yeah, I'm Asa. I'm going to be talking about Apple Watch and all the experience I've had with it, which is really cool. It's a device that extends your iPhone 6 or later versions of iPhone. So if you have an iPhone 5 or less, it's not going to work. So I'm sorry. But iPhone 6. Going with this, as I said, Apple Watch is an extension, which that by itself means it won't have any standalone apps or apps just for the Apple Watch. You have to have an Apple Watch app with your iOS app. And they aren't going to be any complicated. There's not going to be complicated interfaces. It's going to be very simple UI and simple architecture, stuff like that. Little customization. But the oddest thing about it is that they can't talk directly to each other. Your iOS app will never talk directly to your Apple Watch and tell it to do stuff, nor is it vice versa. There is notifications that will allow you to do that a little bit, but there's not really like silent notifications or anything like that. So you kind of gotta fight with it a little bit. But moving on, when you create an Apple Watch app and add it to your project, you will have 3 targets, which I include an image up there where you can see them all. There is the actual iPhone application, which is the one that you make, but I will add WatchKit extension and the WatchKit app. The WatchKit extension is actually going to be the physical code of your WatchKit app, and it's only ran on the iPhone. It is not ran on the Apple Watch. The WatchKit app is the storyboards and UI that will be used to display on the WatchKit app. Those talk to each other through Bluetooth. So it's really cool how you touch a button on the watch and it sends a Bluetooth signal to the phone. The phone does some code and it sends it back and it does things. It's really cool. The life cycle. The WatchKit app when you launch it, it will create the interface controller. Then it will load up the UI. It will initialize the user interface, which then it will start calling the methods we see on the left, the init with context. When it goes to display the UI, it will call will activate. Where interacts with the UI is when the various methods will start to be called for IB actions and other similar things like that. And when the where stops interacting, it calls did deactivate. Suspend WatchKit extension will happen whenever the watch leaves the distance of the iPhone or you stop running the app in general. There are different elements of a WatchKit app, which one is the physical app, which UI, and how it interacts with everything. And then there's glances and actionable notifications. Glances are a little view that pops up before the app actually starts running. On your Apple Watch, you will see your little app icon, and when you tap it, that will bring up the glance, and then you can click the glance to go deeper into the Apple Watch. A glance is usually used for displaying the most important information of your Apple Watch app. Generally, maybe if you have a music app, you would have the currently playing song displayed on that glance before you go deeper into it. Notifications are you send a message and then the Apple Watch will get it and it might react by opening up the app or sending a message to your iPhone to do some type of background call. Simple stuff like that. Now the WatchKit app has a bunch of UI elements. It contains the UI displayed. And below you see all those classes. You don't really have to memorize them, but that's basically all of them, almost. I might be missing one or two, but that's pretty much the whole framework for the user interface. So you have an interface controller, which is kind of like a UI view controller, except it's a lot more rudimentary. It doesn't have a lot of the functionality of a view controller, but it is used for displaying the specific content of an Apple Watch screen. The interface object, you read the little labels. There's table, a label, button, slider, date, device, other types of information that you might display to a user in order for them to view and witness what your app is doing for them. So that's cool. There is two forms of navigation, which is hierarchical and page-based. Hierarchical is more like a drill down. You'll tap a table view row and it will go deeper and deeper down until you reach your destination, which will have the desired data. And the page-based is like a photo booth where you just kind of swipe through photos and you view everything. Each screen is going to be its own. The context menu, which is it's a new feature on top of Apple's hardware. For this, it'll show up on any screen that you create one for, and it will only show up when you do a long press. Generally, you would, I guess, display to the user that you can do that because it's not really obvious when you first open it up, but you can hold your finger on the Apple Watch and then it will bring up a context menu of different buttons that you may select to do actions quicker, and that will make the user experience easier. Glances, which each app will only have one glance screen, so you can't have multiple different customizations of a glance screen. It's going to be an interface controller, and you would have code in there to run it. But if you wanted to update it dynamically, it becomes a little difficult because it doesn't rerun the cycle method, so you have to have a timer in it, and then every time the timer fires off, you would make an API request or other types of actions to update the UI. Tapping the glance directly opens the Apple Watch app, so you can't have buttons on it or sliders or other types of items that might interact with the user. So it's very direct. Notifications, they are kind of special in the sense that they're different from the other screens because they have their own special class for it, which is a WK User Notification Interface Controller. That class, although inherits from Interface Controller, is only specific for notifications, and they have two functionalities as well. One of them being a quick look, where you will look at the notification screen, and if you continue to hold your wrist up, it will transition to a more detailed screen that you could prefer to have a table or scroll view or other types of information that would just be more beneficial to the user than a quick glance. There are default notification screens that will come up, but you can also customize them to your liking or whatever type of UI you'd like to place in it. So that's good. That's really the gist of an Apple Watch app. So with that, then I'll run one. I'll run one over here. They're a little weird. You have to define targets, which I don't have one set up. I lost it. Or I might not be on the right branch. I am not on the right branch. That's funny. Tower.
Just drag it.
Drag it
Yeah.
over in the branches. Yeah. Stashed. No, Git. Why you do this to me? DS store. That file, yeah, it's gone. There we go. Yeah, it's right there.
Oh,
Yeah, I have
you
it.
committed it.
Yeah, I did that right. The DS store though was being evil. So you have your Apple Watch little target. Yeah, that's how you run it. You have to define a completely separate target, and it will run it by itself. It doesn't run it next to the.
Xcode's been bugging out my computer all day, where if you have it in full screen, it will just disappear.
You crashed it. Avenge me.
With the beta version or 6?
It's the beta version.
That's a beta.
It's weird. It brings up this simulator, but it won't actually run the app. So it's not with it.
Pro
Okay, so
game.
just remember you have to bring up the other window.
Yeah. Oh,
The
yeah.
Apple Watch one.
External displays. Rerun this. The monstrosity of an Xcode beta. Run my app.
Just can't rerun it.
I think it's lagging. Oh no, I got it. Alright. It refuses. All my targets. Whatever.
When you start the simulator.
Possibly. It's a good idea.
Force close to simulator.
Xcode beta. I lost it. I killed Xcode beta.
May say you have to run the actual app first.
It is running.
So, does it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's.
Installs the extension.
Yeah. Well, I ran the target, the one with the watch, so it would run that and install it. But this is the glance. I just have very simple UI there, but you could have anything like a picture or more important information that the app would display. But you tap the glance, and then it will load up. You can see that loading HUD that was there. That's default stuff that Apple gives you. It's really convenient. They have a lot of features that activate as you move around the app. If things take too long, it'll automatically display that HUD. And if you go outside of a range, it'll automatically suspend the app. So that's pretty cool. What I have here is actually a modal. It's showing the different page-based navigation type, where you can see there's a little dot at the bottom that will show you how many pages there are, and you can swipe between them left to right. Apple Watch by default has a swiping from left to right gesture to go back. So that kind of comes with it, unless you disable it. But that's kind of how it works. So I cancel it. It goes down. This is a table view. It has different objects that I load up from local resources. And all of the layout of the text and the image is done automatically for me. There is no auto layout on the Apple Watch. It has its own layout system. And you actually use something called a group, which will all that functionality with it. So this being a table, each table has a group for a row, and then that will do the layout. So you select one of the rows, it loads up the next page, which will have more detailed information, which again, this is just a scrolling view. That scrolling is done automatically for you. It is not something that you have to tell it to do or tell it what the content size is. It figures out that everything here, this contains 3 groups, or a label, an image, and another label. And it will resize everything depending on those objects. But when you create these Apple Watch apps, you can't put objects side by side, so to speak. You put them into the screen, and the framework automatically orders them in top-down fashion. You can reorder them to say which one's at the top or second or third, etc. But you can't actually say that this one's going to be next to this other item, or I couldn't put text to the left of that image. So that's that. If I do a long press,
Can you open the storyboard
open the storyboard.
for the watch cam?
Yeah. Watch good. Yeah. It's pretty unique.
It's on double screen, full screen.
Yeah. What you saw when I first loaded it, was the modal that came up. And then there's your different interfaces. It's overall pretty simple here. Though that is what in the simulator is the context menu. If you're on any screen and you do a long press, it will automatically zoom out. It does that blurring feature for you. You don't have to do that. And then it has these buttons. Those buttons are very static though. You have to have an image and you have to have text underneath them. Any of those buttons that you add in the actual storyboard cannot be removed at runtime. They are only added and removed at design time. Any buttons that you want to add at runtime can be removed and added. But normally, you cannot add and remove views in general. You can only do that at design time. So if you wanted to create a new label and add it to the screen dynamically, you can't do that. What you have to do in those type of instances is have all the labels that you ever want to show on the screen at that time, and then set them to hidden. When you do that, the layout feature of Apple Watch will automatically squish everything together to fit a smaller screen size. And it crashed before. It's still in beta. So that's very simple. A list to a more detailed back. This shows the hierarchical navigation type. The storyboard, that was more interesting. We'll close this. As we looked at before, here's the different objects that we see. I labeled those Modal 1 and Modal 2. But those are the view controllers that I chose to display modally right as the app started up. The other controllers are just simple things. There's a group here, and within a group, you can define whether or not you want it to be horizontal or vertical. So I said before, you put things in a vertical fashion, but in a group, you can specify going horizontal or vertical. So in here, I was able to put an image and a label, and you can see by these frames that they don't match what was in the simulator. Over here, all of that was done dynamically for me. I didn't have to touch it much. So that was pretty nice of Xcode.
How many items can you put together in a group?
As many as you want, it'll expand.
As many will fit, isn't it? Or does it automatically scroll left to right?
Oh, if you put it horizontally, it's just going to drop down to
It'll
the,
fit as many width-wise
yeah,
as possible.
and then it will start dropping it vertically.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you want like a side-scrolling feature, you wouldn't be able to get that.
Only if you have a page-based layout.
Right.
So then you could have multiple controllers and scroll left to right. It's very simple. It won't let you do complicated, or, well, that's not really complicated, but different weird things like that. My glance, which you can see, is very simple as well. It's got a static label and then two labels I kind of made dynamic. Those have fixed stuff. And then down here is the notification controllers. You have a default static one, and then you can define a dynamic one. To test all this, you have to define different targets, which in here, you see I labeled this one glance. You would have to add more targets or schemes to run notifications or just the watch app by itself. But from there, I could show you in this code. There's simple, it's very simple. There's not a lot of code in here. The table view, though, is very different. You have to manually loop through all of the rows and tell it what the data is, setting it.
Can you set it to presentation mode so everybody can see?
Where's presentation mode?
Under preferences.
Xcode preferences. Fonts, presentation. Swag. All right. We got the load table. Yeah, I load up a property list just to make it simple because sharing data between them can kind of get difficult. But you define number of rows, which is done there. This is in Swift, if it wasn't obvious, but it's in Swift. There's some optional extraction, stuff like that. I loop through all the rows and I create the row there, my line, and then from there I'm able to set all the data. So that's kind of cool. Did select row is where it actually loads it. Again, the navigation for pushing it, I have this string, which is what it identifies that controller as. The context is the data that you might use to populate that controller. So in my storyboard interface, I'm going to have the identifier up here at the top right, and that's the actual string that you would call. So it's almost like calling a segue, where you would say perform segue with identifier, but you simply say push view controller with this identifier, and it gets everything for you. When you pass the context to it, it calls init with context. Here we are. It calls this method, which it passes the context object with it. From there, you're able to extract it out and hear your view however you need or such things. With that, the table rows I thought were very unique because they inherit from NS object, which is very low in the hierarchy chain of inheritance. But that's how most of the objects are. Even an interface controller up here, this is going to inherit from NS object. So we can see up here, most of the objects will, as opposed to in normal iOS development, the it's customary to see other things like UI respond or UI control, but they don't have that. So they're doing hackery, so to speak, in the background with these table rows by just doing an NS object subclass instead of an actual UI table view row, which, again, even how the table views are set up with this is very different. There's no delegate. It doesn't call self row index packs or even height for row. It determines its own height. But the UI in general is actually very limited. I can't go over here and actually change the font of my, well, not the font size. I can't say make this 12 points or make this 16 points. It doesn't give me that type of flexibility. I have a scale, but that's about it. It'll scale up and down. Yes.
Will it scale based on different size of the watch face? So there's supposed to be a bigger one, a smaller one. Will I do that automatically in the background, or is it going to screw up your views?
When you select a different watch, I don't think it will make the text bigger. It will just display more content,
Okay.
and then you can scroll through it. Yeah. It's kind of cool though, like the alignment. There's stuff like that. If you're accustomed to iOS, there's 3 options, and here they have 5, so it's a little unfair. They get all that extra stuff. And then there's just different height widths, which it'll try to meet this using the layout stuff that it does in the background and do all that. But that's basically all there is to it. They have their own image, XC assets, which is also different from a normal app, which might be up here. You have XC assets, but they have their own. So it's its own app in itself, but it can't do a lot. Although in the extension where the code is, you can run things like API calls and stuff like that. So generally, syncing data would be probably something in there, like a timer. But you can add, since it is an extension, you can add it to an app group. From there, you can access local data back and forth. But that's basically the gist of it. So
Do you have an
that's
example
what
in there of the Bluetooth connecting between the watch and the phone?
it does it by default. It does it in the background. So I can't actually show you one because I don't have the physical devices.
Right.
But Apple.
Can you use that with a simulator to be able to?
So
No.
by default, the reason that everything's an NS object and everything else is called like interface this, interface that, those classes that you're creating subclasses of, they're actually proxies. And everything that you set up inside them communicates over Bluetooth back and forth via a proxy protocol that Apple defines. So the complete Bluetooth interface is completely abstracted from it. So if you were to have, say, an image on the watch, and you were inside the extension and you're programming and you say set image with data, Apple will abstract the fact that it's sending the image data from the phone extension to the iWatch. So in reality, even at this point, since we don't have a device to test on, you don't even know how much lag time is between operations like that, how much of a delay there is, or how good the interaction is, or anything like that.
Unfortunately, yes. Oh.
Yeah, so the Bluetooth communication protocol, do you know if that's 4.0 or Bluetooth Low Energy?
They didn't say.
They didn't say?
No, Apple documentation didn't say at least.
Yeah,
But it's still in beta, so they still have a lot of information to release and possibly more updates to make it a little more flexible than the static nature that it has now. But you had a question?
My understanding is that the apps actually run on the iPhone, right?
Yes.
So, yeah, we don't have a way to test the lag between the actual watch and the phone. But is there a way to connect multiple watches to a single iPhone? Is there any part of the documentation saying that?
There wasn't, no.
No?
No, there wasn't. I would think that you can't do that. But I don't actually know. They didn't say, and they didn't really go that much into detail.
The connections are done by.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like the handoff feature.
Right.
It's just kind of all handled in the background for you. So if you were to have a phone that's paired with your watch, then the phone will most likely default proxy to that watch. So if you were to swap watches, it would probably change its proxy over to that watch, or it's all autonomously in the background.
Right, or you have to sign in with your Apple ID or something, so.
Yeah.
Like the handout feature, right?
Like our abilities are limited to setting the properties and just saying, here's a class and here's this. And then on the phone, you install the storyboard and image assets. And from there, it's just the middleman is Apple.
Right.
We have no control of saying, like, I want you to do this to this to this.
Well, yeah.
You treat it like an app.
I don't think they would let you sync two watches to one device as well, because when you go to download an app, if you have an Apple Watch Target with it, it asks you if you'd like to install it. So from there, if you hit yes, then it installs that app and installs the UI components onto your Apple Watch. To do that with multiple devices could be weird. Yeah. Any other questions? No questions?
One
Oh,
question.
yeah.
Is there any speech to like API or?
Oh, like Siri? Oh, any code that you could write on your iOS app, you could write in the Apple Watch extension part, but it's not going to come out of the Apple Watch and it's not going to come out of the phone. So no, but you could do stuff with it.
Just wants his little Star Trek communicator.
Yeah. Yeah.
And remember that Apple's been rumored to open up Siri to HomeKit at some point in the future. So I'm sure that you'll be able to integrate like HomeKit in some form of communication with the Apple Watch at some point. It's just a matter of when.
They really need to make Siri work with third-party apps first
Yeah.
of all. Like,
That's true too. I think that's it.
All right, guys.
We're good? Hooray. Disconnect.
Yep. All right, guys. So now we have bed.
You control it.
There we go.
Just shut it down. Just say try again. Stop. Oh, I stole this. You're gonna want this, right?
There's 230.
Yeah, I think one of them is 30 and one of them is it's standardized at like 29.9. With the top third here, it's just 31. Cool. That's working.
All right.
All right.
There you go. Slip that in your pocket or wherever.
Right here, I
Get it.
guess. Does it have a clip?
Yep.
All right. This is tiny. All right. So my name is Ben Golke, and I'm an iOS developer. I work at a company called Blue Toad in Millennia. We make digital publication software. So I basically work on an app that is a sort of a container for magazines. So today I'm going to talk about view controller lifecycle a little bit, just kind of how a view gets instantiated and whether you do it programmatically or storyboard and kind of the different methods that get called and stuff. Some stuff that I actually recently became a little bit more familiar with because of the app that I work on at work. So view lifecycle. The UI view controller loads this view programmatically or via storyboard or a nib. And there are several methods that are called on the UI view controller instance to provide an opportunity for customization. So things like layout, like changing the layout, or changing content, adding in pictures or whatever it is that you want to do to the view. So if you do programmatic initialization, you're probably initially going to use load view. You're going to override it and then actually instantiate your view that way. It's kind of the old school way to do it. Most people probably at this point use storyboard or a nib, but if you want to do it programmatically, you could do it this way. So one thing about load view is don't ever call super on it. It's not necessarily going to hurt anything, but basically what load view does is it instantiates the actual UI view that's going to be displayed in the window. And if you wanted to do custom UI view creation, if you call super, it's going to call it superclass's instance, which is going to create sort of a default view, which is then going to immediately discard because it's going to use yours. So it's not necessarily damaging, but it is sort of wasteful. So just you can avoid calling load view in that case. So you're going to create your root view object, whatever that is. It can be essentially anything. If you use the default load view, it just creates sort of a blank view that you can stick subviews in. So you might choose to have it be an image or something else. And then you're going to set its frame, which is going to be generally the size of the window, but not necessarily. And then you're going to create any of your subviews that you want, and you're going to and then add them to that root view using add subview. So stuff you've probably seen before. If you're using auto layout in that case, you're going to then take those subviews and you're going to add constraints to them so that they actually appear like they're supposed to on the screen. And if you're not, you can use, even if you are, you can use view will layout subviews and view did layout subviews. They're two methods that get called at certain points that allow you to know that those things are going to happen or have happened and allow you to customize from there. So if you're loading from a nib or a storyboard, it's actually much easier because you're actually going to lay out your subviews in the storyboard or in the nib visually. And the way that a storyboard or a nib work is it's actually going to, once you put the views in and you set your constraints and you sort of, if it's a label, you set the font and all that stuff. When it packages that up to put it in the app to be loaded on the phone, what it does is it actually packages that all up into an archive, which is then unpacked at runtime and gives you fully instantiated objects that are ready to go immediately. So that's kind of why that stuff works like magic. The one thing about it though is when that does happen, the stuff is not necessarily laid out. It's just instantiated. So like the label or the whatever it might be, it exists. It has a memory location, but it is not necessarily laid out because at that point auto layout probably hasn't run yet. So this is just an example of a standard view controller class that you might create a couple of properties, button, text field, and then you have sort of your standard action, IB action that you're going to run, let's say if you click one of those buttons. So then what you want to do is you probably want to tweak the layout. And so you have two places you can do that. You can do it in view will layout subviews, and that's called right before the subviews are laid out, before, like if it's auto layout, for example, before the auto layout rules are actually put into place. And then there's one after view did layout subviews. So here's an example that I actually pulled from one of my apps. And let's say, for example, you have a universal app that runs on both the iPhone and the iPad, and it's going to display a modal view for something. And let's say on the iPad we want to use the form sheet size of the modal view, which if you've used that before, it's kind of the one that's more or less a square, and it appears right in the middle of the screen, and it sort of blurs the background behind it and allows you to do something in that modal view and then dismiss it. So it has a standard size, but let's say you want to make it smaller or larger, you want to change its size. You can actually do that if you do it in view layout subviews. Like for example, I'm checking to see if we're on the iPad. If we are, then I'm going to change the super views bounds and change it to, let's say, 540 by 400, which makes it a little bit shorter than it normally would be. And so you can do that there, and then you can basically be guaranteed that that's actually going to happen, because there's no real way to do that, at least that I couldn't find in the storyboard, to say I want it to be a form sheet style but a custom size, because a form sheet style is sort of inherently a default size. So then in the view did layout subview, so this would be the same app, we're doing something different here. So this is going to be called right before, and this is called right after. And so you can see, again, we're checking on the iPad, and then what we're going to do is we're actually going to adjust the size of the image. Let's say you have an image that you don't know how big it is until you actually load it. You might set up a standard image in the storyboard with a certain size, but you want to adjust that size, and you want to do it proportionally, right? I don't want to necessarily just make the image stretch itself, because what if, for example, it's a magazine cover, and if you were to stretch it laterally or vertically, then it would be stretched out and it wouldn't work. And so what you can do is if you wait till view did layout subviews, you know that at that point the auto layout rules have been applied, and then you can basically get its width. You can figure out sort of the proportionate height change you need to make it fit, and then you can update the constraint for the height to make sure that then it is proportionally sized. So then we'll jump to the demo. So this demo it's extremely simple, and it is on GitHub, so if you want to check it out, you can do that. So basically we've got very, very simple setup here, right? We've got a naughty and nice counter app. And so it's extremely trivial. It's basically 2 UI views, a couple of buttons, and then 2 labels. And so what I've done here is I'm using size classes, which I guess I wasn't here, but I guess last month Sonny presented on size classes, which are at this point, I think, awesome. I'm probably going to use them from now on. And what they allow you to do is they allow you to create a layout in your storyboard that is pretty much universal. You can, in this case, I didn't actually need much for this, so I was able to use the any size to do it. And so it'll run both on the iPhone, on any size iPhone, and also on the iPad. And it will be one UI. So just a couple things. I did actually change, I found that, for example, we're going to look at the text on the button. So I found that if in this size it's fine, but if we were to shrink it to a iPhone 5 width, the word naughty is too big at that point. The font size is too big and it would truncate. And so what you can actually do is you can come into the button, either one, and you can, if you've not seen this before, you can click the little plus button next to the font size, and you can essentially then say, I want to pick a particular size class. Like, so what I did was I picked compact width, and then actually picked any height, which is already selected here. And so I just then changed the font size for that. So now what will happen is if at runtime we're at a situation where we are compact width and regular height, or compact height, doesn't matter, it's going to shrink the size of the text slightly to 60 from 100, and so that way it's not truncated at that point. You can still see it. So it's just a minor tweak. I was able to make this any size essentially work with that one size class based constraint. So what we'll do is, I'll just show you this real quick. So these are the classes, and most of this stuff is just a way to show you kind of when stuff runs. So the first thing that's going to run is going to be awake from nib, and that's going to be something that gets run not during programmatic instantiation, but during a storyboard or a nib-based instantiation, so which is what we're doing here. And so it's kind of the first thing it runs that allows you to, you can be guaranteed at awake from nib that all the classes, all the objects that are in the storyboard or the nib have been instantiated, but probably nothing else has happened at that point. They just exist. And then of course you did load, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with. We set up a little bit of initialization, and then I have view will appear, view will layout subviews, view did layout subviews, and then view did appear. So if we run it, what we're going to see is we'll see it run appropriately with all the constraints so that it looks nice on, in this case, the iPhone 6. There we go. So I shrunk it to half so it'll all fit, but that's the iPhone 6 size, and so you can see when you click, you get it. It just counts the thing. And so you can see down here, if I can make this a little bigger so you can see it. It's actually. Start it fresh so you can see exactly what it's doing. Basically what happens is you can see first awake from nib runs. At this point we're taking a look at the green views frame. You can see that it exists, but it has no values at all. It's all 0. And then you can see if you did load, we have some values, but if you look at them, 560 by 270, that's much bigger than it needs to be, right? Much bigger than what's going to fit on this screen. And so what that is that's actually just the default size from the storyboard itself. It, at this point, has not applied its auto layout constraints. So you can kind of see that viewed load is not necessarily a place where you're going to want to mess with the size of something, because at this point it doesn't have the right information. View will appear runs next, and you can see again it's the same size. So again, the auto layout constraints had not been applied yet. And then I paired these together, so view will layout subviews and view did layout subviews run essentially back to back. You can see in the first instance it is still too big in view will, but in view did, it is the size that actually appears on the screen. And the reason why it runs twice is because if it changes the frame, if the layout of the subviews actually change, it causes these to be run again. So in every test I've run, in the initial run, they always run twice basically, because it's laying it out, it's changing it, and then it notices that it changed it, and then it's running them, it's calling them again. Happen if we were to go to landscape, because it's an orientation change, because essentially the auto layout rules have to change the constraints to make everything fit according to the rules. You can see that it runs an additional it runs once each again. So basically that's just kind of some stuff that I learned about how to how to sort of better manage the data that I was trying to display, and rather than trying to fight where that belongs and how to lay it out so it looks appropriate. Really what I've kind of discovered is basically you want to put most of your stuff, if it's going to be layout based, like you're going to change the size of something, you're going to change it, probably going to want to do it in view did layout subviews. At that point, it's far enough along in the life cycle that at that point everything is laid out, and you can then change something and it will do what you ask rather than you put it somewhere else and then you run it and nothing happens. So you can check out that. It's an extremely trivial app, but if you just want to check out what it's doing, you can get it on GitHub, and that's pretty much it. I'm on Twitter, and this slideshow is on SlideShare at that link. So,
If you put your change in view, say you're going to make a change to one of your views based on some conditional value,
Mhm.
and you do that in view did layout subviews,
mm-hmm.
and then it's going to recall and
Right.
those constraints again. Are you actually
Right.
going to see that in there, or would you see that animation in there, or would you see the old view before it switched to the new view? Because
Okay.
if you put it in
Right.
did appear,
Right.
it's already appeared.
Yeah.
You're going to see that change.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so like I actually kind of skipped over that part. Well, yeah. So you can see that when we actually ran it actually ran twice, right? So we got awake from nib, we got view did load, we got view will appear, we have our pair of will and did layout subviews, and then because it changed, it ran them again, but then view did appear actually didn't run until after that. So view did appear is pretty much your last chance to change anything, and at that point, the view is already visible to the user. So if you did make a change, like if you actually made an animation change, if you want it to be animated, that would need to, in order for that to be useful, it would need to be visible. But if you did make, like for example, when you go landscape to portrait, you're not controlling that animation necessarily yourself. It's doing it for you, but it is nonetheless an animation, right? The stuff is shifting, it's getting larger, that kind of thing. So I think the animations would probably, if let's say you make a change afterwards and it's going to cause another pair to run, it's going to do your animation and then run this pair, and then and during that time everything would be visible. So probably anything that you changed you'd see it change.
So when you do the rotation, there is a callback for a transition coordinator
Mm-hmm.
to do the animations.
Yep.
I just wanted to know that. But
Yeah.
So if you were to change an auto layout constraint in code,
Mm-hmm.
where would the best place to do that be?
Uh,
Because say if you had two views on screen,
Right.
and you have a condition where you want to remove one of the views,
Mm-hmm.
and you want to bump it up, and say your constraints aren't configured to the sense where it just automatically bump up.
Mhm.
You want to change a hard-coded value from 40 to 20, or
Right.
something like that to bump it up. Where would the best place to do it?
I would say the best place to put it would be in view did layout subviews, because that's what you just described is essentially exactly what I was doing with the image in the example. If we go back to that. So here, at this point I have a property to the height constraint for the image view that I'm using, and it is just set to a default value, to sort of a maximized size. But at the point that I'm actually going to run this, I'm going to show this view, only then do I actually know literally what the dimensions of the image are, because it could be landscape, it could be portrait, it could be a square, it could be anything. And so at that point, once I get the dimensions of the image itself, I can then, what I want to do is I basically want to maximize its width, right? So I want to set the width to the same width that it already has, right? I'm actually not touching the width at all, just leaving it alone. But then I want to basically make the image taller or shorter so that it proportionally fits inside that frame, so that it is not stretched, right? So that if there's text in the image, it's not distorted. And so what I'm doing is I'm basically just getting the width, figuring out what needs to be, the multiplier, so we can get a proportional height, and then resetting the height. And so I'm resetting that constraint basically to, in this case, sort of an arbitrary value, a calculated value, and I'm doing that in view did layout subviews.
So if you wanted to change the constraint value just one time,
Mhm.
how view did load almost one time, and not every time it changes orientation.
Right. Yeah, if you just want to change it once, like the view loads and you want to change it once, then probably view did load or even view did load is going to be sort of higher up, and then view will appear is right after that. So really, either one of those. View will appear actually would run every time the view is going to be shown. So if that's what you want, otherwise it'd be viewed low would be that's really the only one that's going to run once.
So, as a warning, I would try to stick to always doing it in viewed layout subviews, because I've had many instances, and there's actually a few tutorials talking about this, where viewed layout subviews will conflict with anything you do before time, and it could completely contradict whatever you do once.
Yeah, certainly, it's certainly the case that when I moved this code to here, it works like it's supposed to, and when it was sort of anywhere else, it was causing problems.
So let's say I don't know if that's true, but the nice and the naughty buttons, are they views themselves?
The word is actually a button with a large target, and then the color behind it is just a view.
So let's say when you click on nice, you want that nice button to be bigger.
Okay, right.
Every time, right?
Right.
Just keeps increasing.
Okay.
So you will normally change the size in the callback for the button, or you
Mhm.
will schedule that to be 2 and do a refresh of the layout.
Well, so if you change if you change the size of the button in the callback for the button right in the IB action, it's going to cause these guys to run again after that, because you're changing the layout of the view, and so it's causing the view controllers, these two, to run again. So probably wouldn't matter whether you put it in there or you put it in here, but either way, it's going to run these again.
Just to top that off, you will want to call layout subviews after you change the size. That will force the life cycle back.
Yeah.
Like you can set a frame much later on, but it won't call that again unless you call layout subviews, which you always want to call after resetting the frame and everything, so automatically relay everything else.
You can even call, there's another one, that needs layout, which basically just tells the view to recycle its view.
Where's the first point that it actually knows its window size? For the like, if I switch the orientation, at which point along view did, will appear, will layout subviews, did layout, does it actually know it's correct?
So at least on first run, it appears that it doesn't know the actual. Well, if you're talking about you want like the window size.
Yeah, well, see, I've got a modal inside.
Because you can ask for the window size
I'm
immediately.
rotating it, and it doesn't know where the heck it's supposed to go, and it keeps jumping all over the place.
Right.
So I want to, I'm actually making that modal disappear and then reappear again. 'Cause
Right.
It's too much of a pain. So if I could actually get this to get it in there, I could leave it on the screen maybe.
Right. So the window, you want the actual view's bounds, right?
No, I actually want the entire bounds of the window so that I can center it in the modals. In there.
Well, if we're talking about the bounds of the window, which is essentially the bounds of the device, right, more or less,
Right.
because at least on every device so far, you can only run one thing at a time. At that point, you can ask for the window dimensions basically as soon as you could use it in the transition coordinator. So with I think, is that iOS 7? I think it might be iOS 7 where they switched to transition coordinator. But
There's the transition coordinator in iOS 7, but the size class one is obviously iOS 7.
yeah, right. But then there's also either should auto rotate is just whether you want it to or not. But there's another auto rotation method callback that you can override. I forget what its signature is, but basically it's saying that there's two. It's basically the orientation is going to change and the orientation has changed.
Will rotate, did rotate.
What's that?
Will rotate,
Right.
did rotate.
Yeah. So you can in either one of those you could query. You want to do it in did, right, because it has already done it. Because you want in this case if we're going to landscape, you really want the height of the device, which is becoming the width of the device, right? Because you're going from tall to
Right.
wide.
Well, the will it doesn't know it yet, and the did it already has, and so
Yeah.
it's already screwed it up at that point.
Okay.
Matching the window, you should have the window the instant that it's loaded. So if you call like, what is it, UI application, main application, then you grab the window size, you should always know that. And when you rotate, you'll just swap like if you're in landscape mode, your widest number is going to be your width. And if you're in portrait mode, your widest number is going to be your height. So you just swap.
Yeah, I mean, you could really,
You'll
yeah.
just keep an origin of 0, 0.
You can really query those numbers, as soon as you launch, and then those numbers are not going to. Device is not going to change its physical screen size, right?
Right.
So you could just capture length and or height and width, right, and then just use them interchangeably depending on using those will and did auto rotate to know whether you're going to
But
landscape
find the
coming
right time
from.
to make it look good so it doesn't
Yeah.
turn and then jerk and then.
Yeah, you could look at the transition coordinator if you don't have to support things like 5 or 6. If you're going like 7 forward, you can use the transition coordinator, and it has the ability to actually give it a transition coordinator object, and then not use it, but you can do all kinds of stuff in there that you didn't used to be able to do with just the will and the did auto rotate. So you might be able to get it to more smoothly transition. And the other thing you might try is if you haven't tried size classes, you might try that, because I even had one where I had a modal view on in either case on the iPad or the phone, where essentially I had a title, I had a sort of a full width image, and then I had a description box, a text view of like a paragraph of text, and it was all essentially vertically oriented. And what I wanted it to do was, rather than what you would do is you go portrait to landscape and you would just make that scroll up and down because you've got much less height now. What I wanted to do was I wanted to keep the title where it is, keep the image essentially to the left, and then move the text and bring it up to the right of the image so that when you go landscape, it's sort of this way rather than up and down. And trying to make that work without size classes, I worked on, and it just was very complicated. But with size classes, you can basically just define. So what I did was I defined my any, which is sort of the catch-all, and I set it up vertically, and then I went to, it's on the phone, it would be compact height, and then you could use any or regular width, or no, it's compact width. On the phone, it's compact for landscape for some reason. And so then I just go to that selection. I can do it right here. I just go to that in the storyboard. So this is your any. You just come down here and you just pick. You can just sort of pick, whichever ones you want. So I'm going to pick any width and compact height, which covers all iPhones in landscape orientation. And so you choose that, and then what it does is it shrinks it for you, and then you can see what it's done with the auto layout rules that I've already got. I can then come to these rules. So you definitely want to lay it out first in any and set up those constraints for there's no conflicts or anything. And then once you do that, you can come in here and you can then, like if, for example, we wanted this to be different, you can click on it and you can actually just say, in the current size class, I want it to not be installed. And then what it does is it basically takes that constraint and it doesn't apply it in the case of landscape. And so you can just change your constraints around. And so what I did is I literally just sort of set it up so that the picture was on the left and the text was on the right, and made sure that the constraints didn't conflict and everything was fine. And then when you run it, it goes into portrait, it looks like it's supposed to with the any, and when you switch to landscape, it just basically switches you to the other layout constraints, but it does it in an animated way, so automatically, just for free. So the image kind of shifts a little bit, the text kind of slides up, and then goes to the right, and then it's all lined up. And so effectively, I got that animation just by really just defining 2 sets of constraints and letting the device figure it out for me.
So say you had 2 view controllers, and you want to use the view of one inside another. How would you forward the view life cycles from one view controller to the other?
Well, are you talking about using an actual container view, or like the actual choice here?
Get a explaining child view controllers.
Yeah. So there's actually a container view that you can put in the storyboard, right? And then what it does is it just basically gives you a frame that you can stick another view controller in. But they're both going to have their own sets of view controller lifecycle, callbacks, because they're 2 different view controllers. So if you wanted, so you're saying like if I wanted to be made aware in the child that view will happen in the parent?
You will, like technically you have to add, the container view is a shortcut inside storyboard for doing this.
Mm-hmm.
But if you rig up add child view controller
Mm-hmm.
and such with a view,
Mm-hmm.
you will forward declarations from one view controller to another. If you just add a subview without doing that, you won't get the view to load. You will.
So you're saying if you do it as a child view, the forwarding happens automatically?
Yes.
Okay.
Like
That's good to know.
will basically forward down the chain one after another.
So that's good to know. So if you use it, like I said, either with the shortcut or if you actually define a child view controller in the parent view controller in code, the stuff gets forwarded. So
Technically, in your case, if you had a modal that was custom, you could create another view controller for that, and it would just lay itself out like a regular view controller, and you'll just add it as a child view controller on the screen. So it will lay itself out to the screen as a regular view controller would, and you would be able to just add it as a sub-view basically, and get all the normal decorations and everything.
The old school way of doing that, if you had landscape and portrait orientation layout that you wanted to be completely different is you could define 2 different view controllers, one that's portrait and one that's landscape, and then just at the time of the orientation swap, you could swap out the actual views themselves. But that's that's essentially creating 2 sets of the same thing. So size classes or using like the view controller containment, the child view controller probably would be much quicker. As long as you can support, I think it's 7 and forward. If you need 6 or 5, then you're kind
More
of,
complicated stuff in there too.
yeah. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you.
All right, so now for the goodies. Changing it up a little bit. Thank you, hon. So as some of you